I'm Cynthia. I work at Causa Justa Just Cause. It's an organization based in San Francisco and Oakland that works with Latino immigrants and African American folks who are fighting foreclosure and who are tenants in San Francisco and Oakland. We also work with a number of both immigrant and Black folks who are working together to try and change the ways in which immigrant communities are being impacted right now by different laws and policies and also practices of corporations. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're targeting Wells Fargo for private prison development and detention center development. And I wanted to start with some questions just to get a little bit of a feeling for who's in the room. How many folks can raise their hand if you know somebody who's in prison? How many people know somebody who is in a detention center or has been in a detention center? How many people know somebody who is an immigrant? And how many of you know a person of color? How many of you know a poor person? How many of you know somebody who's ended up on the street or near the streets? So many of us, right? And I say that just to start us up in a feeling and knowing that, it is true. It's not something I'm making up, that all of us have a lot in common around the issue. And so I'm going to start a little bit about some of the hard data on Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has money invested in private prisons and detention centers, through both in CCA, which is Corrections Corporations of America, and the GEO Group. And how many folks are familiar with those two? Those two are the biggest developers of private prisons and detention centers in the country. And the way they function is that they make money for every person that comes into their prisons or to their jails. And this isn't so much of like, oh, well, they make money if they're convicted of something or if they've been there for so many years or so many months. They make money per day, per hour, per week. And so it's a business. It's no longer about this idea that at some point somebody had of what's right or wrong. And I don't even know that that was true ever, but let's say it was true that at some point we started prisons to have some sort of restorative system of you did something wrong, this is what you get, and you learn from it, and then you're out, and we're all better. It's continuing at many different points it's been, and it's continuing to be a business of who's here, how many money we're spending, and who we're getting that money from. All of these private prisons are getting contracts directly from the government to run these private prisons and private detention centers that are not necessarily saving us any more money to start with, right? The private prison industry is a multi-billion industry. Both CCA and GEO combined have over 200 facilities, 150,000 beds, and they make $5 billion per year. Private prisons have also had, they have lobbyists. Wells Fargo and GEO Group share some of the same lobbyists, advocating for anti-immigrant policies, for policies that are going to make more people end up in prison. And are folks familiar with SB 1070? Most people are familiar. Folks familiar with HB 86 or 87? Yeah. And so HB 86 is in Georgia, and HB 56 is in Alabama. And if you know a little bit about what SB 1070, then you know what all of the rest of them are about. And so immigration is a civil violation, right? It's not a criminal violation. And some of the things that SB 1070 did were that if you had any contact with anybody who was an immigrant, then you were being charged with harboring of immigrants, or illegal immigrants, what they call it. And that would be a crime. If you went to school and you're an undocumented person, then that would also be a crime. And if your teachers or doctors, anybody, give you any sort of service, that would also be a crime. So that also happened. That same law was passed in Georgia and in Alabama, and it's word by word. And how many folks are familiar with ALEC? It's the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's what they stand for. And they have lobbyists and corporations together where they get to figure out and draft policies like SB 1070 and like other many policies that end up having more people in prisons and in jails. And then many of us have heard about this woman who ended up in prison because she sent her students her student to a different district, right? And those, like, some of those things are at a local level and are beginning, and then also get moved onto a state and a national level. We see we see some of the charges that are, or some of the charges that are the people are being charged with, that are very small infractions or issues that are having to do with as being poor, as not having the resources that we need, because there isn't the infrastructure that we need to really survive and thrive in our communities, to grow our children, to grow and be healthy, go to a good school. And so many of these folks are ending up in prisons. I guess, going back to Alex, sorry. So there's also, the money that they make per day is $200 a day. On this bed, $6,000 a month per person, and $72,000 a year. So you would see why they're so interested in making sure that there are more and more people ending up in these detention centers and private prisons. They also don't have any health insurance or any other services that any person would need inside of these facilities, because their business is to make money. Wells Fargo is both an investor, and I have more information that I'm going to leave with you, but the ways that they're engaged in the whole mess is they're a major investor, they're an underwriter, they are a broker-dealer of shares, and they're a trustee, a documentation agent, a dealer manager, a financial advisor. When this campaign first started, they were denying they had any ties to both CCA and GEO Group. There's been tons of research done to prove them wrong, and in the past, so I'm going to go back a little bit to what the campaign is. In 2011, a group of community-based organizations that work with immigrant communities came together with Enlace, a binational organization that works in both Mexico and the United States, dealing with the issues of economic hardships in these communities, and also with migration and the impacts of that once people move. And so this campaign got started to really think about and address the reasons why so many people are in detention centers, so many people are in prison, and why we're seeing all these different anti-immigrant policies happening. Are folks familiar with secure communities, or SCOM? Many of us see an issue with this because the basic right of due process is being fully violated, right? Having the right to see a judge, having the right to have a hearing before you're even detained or arrested, like none of that is happening before people are turned over to ICE. And again, going back to what immigration, like migrating without documents, is a civil offense. It's not a criminal offense. And Victor spoke to NAFTA, and the migration that's happened since NAFTA and since many of these foreign policies in different countries is, speaks to the root causes. So this campaign got started out of that, to really start galvanizing support and make more awareness, create more awareness in the community about why we are seeing these policies and we're seeing the scapegoating of immigrants happening so strongly. And so this campaign has been going on for a year and some months, and it's been tremendously successful. In the first 7 years, we saw that the value of their shares dropped by 5.7%. The strategy was to ask people to divest, take their money out. And this strategy to ask people to take their money out was as a way to both create more visibility and individual responsibility, but also to start creating more awareness with people, like, your money is going to these different things. This is why you should divest. And I think Jane is going to touch on some amazing stuff that speaks more to the bigger corporation for profit and all the other things that they're doing. But the campaign right now, the focus of divesting from Wells Fargo is because of these practices. We talked about how much tax money they're getting, and they got alone $43 billion in the bailouts. All that money that was supposed to remodify those loans, refinance the loans, and figure out something with people's homes to actually start negotiating to not be evicting tenants or threatening tenants with eviction, none of that has happened, and we've seen it. They actually just gave a community-based organization that's in the Latino community $100,000 as an award. So we are seeing that they're feeling the pressure from so many of us, and they're trying to figure out where to make up for it. They continue to deny that they're part of CCA and GEO Group, so there's a lot more work ahead. The way that the engagement in the campaign has looked like, we worked with mostly immigrant and black folks, as I mentioned, and it's been from really making the connections between slavery and what happened to folks when they were brought here, and what's continuing to happen to a different community. We had the Chinese Exclusion Act. You have now all the scapegoating of immigrants that is happening, and all these different policies that are for profit, and then you have this huge search of the Occupy movement that's able to bring all those connections between working class folks, poor folks, immigrants, people that are in prison, families of those folks, to really start to bring more awareness and have a more united front to fight back against all these attacks in our communities. So that's why we've been part of this campaign, and we're continuing to engage with the Occupy movement. And in the past 4 years, I think, and maybe when our other guest gets here, she'll have a more correct number, but we've been engaging in the shareholder meetings that are happening every year to really bring visibility to all the crimes that Wells Fargo is committing against our communities. And this year, there's definitely an intention to move the tactics to be to scale in the way that we're pushing against Wells Fargo, and that's why we're excited that so many of the other groups are coming together to really figure out how we create more visibility and more power and really start doing away with these corporations. So I think that's all I have.
Great.